Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today's video explores an alternate version of events and characters in a reimagined storyline. This presentation is structured and adopted into an audiobook style format with narration and visuals to enhance the experience. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the story.
It was quite early when they agreed to meet in the Broken Tower, but Arya didn't mind. She would sleep when her family was safe, which now she was more determined than ever to see happen. She was the first to arrive at the top of the decaying tower, followed soon by Bran and Sansa. Rickon was left asleep. He need not be involved in their plans, lest they wish to have them exposed. "I think not. Father believed us," began Bran simply. "You think so?" asked Sansa almost dejectedly. "It doesn't matter if he believes us or not. We've got to do something before the king comes." "We've got some time to make a plan," reminded Bran. "Not a lot of it. There's never enough time. Time is ever fleeting. The best thing you can do is to become a judge of it and seize the opportunity when it presents itself," said Sansa quietly, and Arya looked at her sister strangely. Where had she learned that? A moment of silence befell them all, until Sansa ended it with, "What are we going to do about Theon?" Bran admitted to everyone with a heavy sigh. "I know not. Some part of me wants to kill him, and yet another part—" "Leave him to me," insisted Arya. And by the silence, Arya could tell that they had done just that. She added Daenerys to her list and began to consider ways she could quietly kill him. "I'll help you if I can," added Bran. They were about to continue when they heard footsteps coming up the stone steps, but then stopped. Arya immediately motioned for her siblings to be quiet and ducked into the shadows. She then creeped carefully down the steps without making a sound, staying in the shadows cast on one side of the stairs. Near the bottom of the steps, she saw Robb in the moonlit side of the stairs, simply standing on a step as though he didn't care whether he was seen or not. "I know you're all up there," called out Robb. Rosier quietly slinked her way to see if anyone else had joined him, before popping out near her brother, shocking him slightly. "When did you learn that?" asked Robb. "Wouldn't you like to know?" said Arya. Robb then looked her straight in the eyes and said, "If you are going to talk about the future, I want in. I want to know what happens." Arya briefly thought of being outside of the twins while Northmen were being slaughtered and then said, "Some things are better left unknown." "Would you have father die again then?" asked Robb pointedly. "Let him come up, Arya," called down Sansa from the top of the stairs. And so Robb joined their meeting. When he had found a spot to sit in their circle on the floor of the topless tower, they continued. "How did you figure out where we were?" asked Bran. Robb grinned and said, "You're not exactly as stealthy as you think, little brother." "What do you want?" asked Sansa. Robb looked to each of them, pausing barely a moment to see that they met his eyes. "I want in on whatever it is you're planning." "You know not what," started Arya. "I know that whatever happens now, father gets killed, and that's something I'm willing to do anything to avoid." Jon would say the same if he were not unconscious still. "You believe us?" asked Bran. Robb nearly snorted before he said, "Obviously. You three might jape about many things, but father dying, no. Never." "Do you think father believes us?" asked Arya. At this Robb sighed and looked to the ground. "I think he wants to believe, but you know how he is. He won't believe anything until the proof's right in his face, staring him down. And by then, it might be too late to do anything," Arya said ruefully. It was then that Robb turned to Sansa and asked, "What can you tell me about the future? Why does father die?" Sansa fidgeted before speaking, as if getting into a more comfortable sitting position would make her any more comfortable with what she had to say. "That's what we were trying to put together with what we know. We know that after Uncle Jon dies, the king will come here and ask father to replace Uncle Jon as hand. Father didn't want to do it at first. He looked troubled about it for a while. But then something changed his mind. He went south, taking Arya and me with him. The king later died. Father opposed his son becoming the next king, and father was beheaded for treason." "Why would father oppose Prince Joffrey from taking his father's place?" asked Robb. "I can think of many reasons," scoffed Sansa, which Arya noticed caught Robb off guard. Arya herself wondered when her sister had finally learned to see the truth about her Prince Charming. Had she kept the delusion right up until he'd called for father's head? When Arya realized that a lull in the conversation had begun to form, she quickly added, "When I was in King's Landing, I heard rumors that father had been claiming that Joffrey wasn't the king's son. If father claimed it, it probably was true. You've heard how father speaks of the king. It makes sense that only a queen's bastard would keep him from supporting the king's rightful son," added Robb. "I heard more about the rumor than that," added Sansa cautiously. What did you hear? Asked Bran. Sansa spoke of the matter cautiously. Arya noticed, as though uncertain to their truth, though suspecting that the queen's children were products of incest with her twin, the Kingslayer. That's what Lord Stannis was claiming. Do you think it's true? You'd know better than either of us, asked Bran, speaking for both himself and Arya. Arya gave her little brother a slight nudge to remind him that she too had a tongue, and then dropped the matter to hear what Sansa had to say. Sansa continued her halting manner of speech. The Targaryens practiced incest and often went mad, and Joffrey, he was another heiress in the making. Of that I am sure. So mayhaps it was true. The queen's children all looked like her, and you, Bran, Rickon, and I all look like Mother. Does that mean Mother has been sleeping with Uncle Edmure? Countered Robb with a blustered look. Sansa added, I know not. Mayhaps Father discovered more, which told him the truth. To be honest, I never want to go back to King's Landing ever again in my life. I want to stay in the North, where it's safe. The North isn't safe, interjected Bran, and everyone turned to look at him. Sansa, however, was the only one who challenged his statement. Only because Robb took everyone and marched south to avenge Father, and then went around claiming to be king in the North and of the Trident. I did what? Interrupted Robb before Bran could answer. After Father was arrested, you called his bearmen and marched south. After he was killed, you then started claiming to be king in the North and of the Trident. Explained Sansa as though she were tiring of being the only one saying anything. I can understand king in the North, but why the Trident? Riverrun was being attacked by the Lannisters, and you broke the siege and captured the Kingslayer, and the Riverlords decided that, since you were the only king to lift the siege, and next in line to inherit the Riverlands after Uncle Edmure, they declared you their king, added Bran, seeing Sansa as weary. Why were they under siege in the first place? Asked Robb. Sansa answered, because Mother kidnapped Tyrion, and the Lannisters wanted vengeance. Robb asked for clarification with Tyrion? Rosier while looking at Sansa and wondered if she should tell their older brother about Sansa's husband, but instead simply said, the Lannister imp. Why would she do that? Because Pet Lord Baelish had Aunt Lysa convince Mother that the Lannisters had killed Uncle Jon, and Sansa trailed off looking to Bran. Nearly killed me. But that's not what I was thinking of when I said the North isn't safe, finished Bran. Then what mean you? Asked Arya. Bran spoke simply and with some gravitas. The others are coming. Robb nearly laughed, but to his credit, contained himself. The others? That's a story old Nan told us to keep quiet in the winters. Bran looked incensed at the implication, and before Arya could stop him, he nearly tackled their older brother down the steps of the tower, as he said, I was attacked by their whites. They are very much real. They're the important threat, not the Lannisters, or anyone else. Bran then seemed to gain control of himself once again, and continued by saying, we have to keep Father in the North so that we can have a chance to stop them before they overrun the wall. But make no mistake, even if we do keep him from going south, the North is not safe. We need to be on our guard. Robb stared at Bran as if seeing him for the first time before saying, so then we do everything we can to keep Father from going south. You said he did not want to at first. What changed his mind? I think it was finding the direwolf dead that might have made him change his mind. Suggested Arya as she thought back to that point that at once hadn't happened yet, and yet had happened what felt like ages ago. Robb turned to her and asked, the direwolf in our kennels? Aye, you found her actually, dead by the road in some late summer snow, added Bran. But how did that change Father's mind? Asked Robb. There was a stag's antler lodged in her throat, and her pups nursing at her dead corpse. Everyone said it was a sign, said Bran, as his memory of that day flitted through his memory. But now that the beast in our kennels, so Father might not be convinced to go south. Sansa, Arya, and Bran winced at hearing the direwolf being called a beast. Sansa then broke in. I think not. It was the direwolf that did it, though. Father's never put much trust in signs. Like you said, Robb, he doesn't believe in something unless he sees the proof right in front of him, staring him in the eyes. And the more I think about it, I think it was Aunt Lysa's letter that changed his mind. Robb rebounded with, but you already told him that Lord Barrett-Aeneas is manipulating Aunt Lysa. Sansa responded rhetorically. But did he believe me? He might after he sees that letter, suggested Robb. Sansa, however, saw it differently. But then he still might go south to try and expose Lord Baelish. You know not what he's like. He thinks 12 moves in advance and considers all possibilities. Once he knew that Father was onto him, and Father's not exactly the most subtle of people. He'd probably pay someone off to kill father and make it look like the Lannisters or someone else did it. But we could kill Baelys, suggested Arya. Bran insisted. No, we need to keep father in the north, looking at the danger beyond the wall. If he can learn about the others, then I think not anything would drag him south. Sansa challenged. How can we do that, though? I mean, if he doesn't believe us now, he certainly won't believe us when we tell him about that. I know not, but I'm going to try and find a way, resolved Bran. As the day continued, Robb found himself distracted by his thoughts. In the future that was. He had been a king, not just of the north, but of the Riverlands as well. But the way Sansa had spoken, it sounded as though that hadn't been a good thing. But how could it not have been a good thing? Well, besides father dying. But maybe he could save father and be king. It was then that Enric, Ser Roderick's eldest squire, delivered a hard blow to Robb's right side with his practiced sword, jarring Robb back from his thoughts as he felt the wind get knocked out of him. Keep your focus, boy, scolded Ser Roderick. In 2 years, I could be your king, Robb wanted to say. But he didn't. Seeing instead the wisdom in the old Whitebeard's words. After all, a dead king did no one any good. Robb wasn't surprised later when he visited Jon that Arya was there to greet him. Has he woken up yet? Asked Robb as he pulled up a small stool, one of the few pieces of furniture in the room, next to where Arya sat on Jon's bed. No, Father, Rickon and Sansa have visited though, and Bran's been busy fighting with Myton. How long have you been here? I didn't see you at the midday meal, added Robb. I want to be here when he wakes up. Why? Asked Robb. I've got something I need to tell him. Like what? Ray gave Robb a glare as if to tell him that it wasn't any of his business, but Robb simply smiled and said, He's my brother too, you know. You own him. Not just because you both share the Stark look. It's about his mother. At news of this, Robb remembered what he had heard, only 2 days earlier from Jon's mouth. I'm just a product of our father's sleeping with his salt wife to him. I can't go to the brothels, lest I accidentally sleep with my mother. Robb sighed before asking, Well, are you just going to spring it on him, or are you going to tell him about how you found out? Rosia didn't respond to Robb, which meant that she had not considered thinking that far ahead. I mean, you cannot say something to that effect without some kind of explanation. As far as he knows now, you're just regular old Arya. How could it be that you heard about this at Winterfell in the 9 years you've been here, when he's been here for much longer and discovered nothing? I could say I heard Father whisper her name at his bedside. Did you hear it from Father in the future? Arya shook her head. Then I wouldn't go putting words in Father's mouth that he did not say. Arya insisted, but he deserves to know. I agree, but first, let's tell him about the future. Arya scoffed. You know not what happens. Robb gave her a chiding look, because certain people are not speaking their minds. This did not seem to affect Arya one bit. Did I make a good king? Asked Robb as he pulled himself closer to her. Arya spoke without looking at him, almost as if she didn't really consider him to be truly in the room. I know not. I was away from you. Well, what did you hear? Arya sighed before saying, You were a good leader of men in battle. They called you the young wolf. So I was a good king. Robb could tell Arya seemed to be holding back some stronger emotion from coming through. By the way, her breath trembled as she said, For a time, I guess. Robb was confused. What mean you by that? Arya met his eyes and with a rage he had never known her capable of before, said, Never trust a Frey. It was then that felt rather uncomfortable in the room, and so he left it to Arya. He didn't know exactly what the Freys had to do with anything, but he could surmise it was nothing good. When Robb returned to his room, he found a surprise visitor there awaiting him. Theon! Waking up with Ned at her side was something Catelyn found to be soothing. Even with all the troubles that they might face, kings, secrets, nephews, treason for the time all seemed bearable with Ned there by her. Unfortunately, such a comfort could not last all day, and soon she was re-immersed in the troubles of the day. The kennel master spoke with her about needing to have the hunters increase their yield to feed the dire wolf that had taken up residence in the kennels. Ned had told her of the children's attempt to corral the wolf for its pups, explaining Bran's gift in the process. So Catelyn decided to avoid the kennels for the time being until the wolf was released with her pups back into the wolf's wood. So once her duties came to a halt, Catelyn had meant to spend the day with her babe. Rickon, however, seemed to have decided to set up camp outside of the wolf's pen. And so she looked for Bran after he had finished his swordplay for the day. Eventually finding him praying in the godswood, Bran knelt in front of the heart tree, speaking in a voice so quiet Catelyn could see his lips move, but hear no voice in the unearthly quiet of the godswood. Catelyn watched her son in his devotions. He'd never been so interested in his religion before this, Catelyn noted. Are you praying for guidance? Aye. About your gift. Bran did not answer her. What are the words? I'll help you pray. There are no chance you simply ask for what you need. Are the old gods so simple then? No wonder your father keeps them. And Catelyn spent a quiet hour with her son, asking his gods for him to receive guidance in the gift he had been bestowed. When they had finished, Bran hugged and thanked her, and Catelyn felt she would remember this moment for the rest of her life. When they came out of the Godswood, they found Theon Greyjoy shooting arrows with her eldest son in the practice yard. Theon seemed to be doing most of the talking, with Robb apparently troubled about something, clearly enjoying the elder's company, but unwilling for some reason to allow himself express it. Catelyn noticed that Bran, upon seeing her husband's ward, froze, staring at him, and so she asked, "What troubles you?" Bran seemed not to notice her at first, before shaking his head and saying, "Nothing, mother." Her son then departed her side without another word, and Catelyn was left to wonder what had caused such a change in her son's moods. The evening meal passed quietly, with Robb and Theon being absent, and her 4 younger children obviously having some secret amongst themselves from the way they spoke with their actions. Ned excused himself early from the table, and Catelyn began to wonder if he might not know something about what was still troubling their youngest. Was it only the wolf? Catelyn meant to meet Ned outside of his son-nephew Jon's room, but when she arrived there, her husband was nowhere in sight. She checked inside Jon's room and found Arya and Bran sitting by Jon's side. Arya noticed the doors opening, and whatever conversation they'd been having over Jon's unconscious side had swiftly ended. Catelyn dismissed her children to their rooms, Arya giving much argument but ultimately acquiescing after she shared a look with Bran. This left her alone with Jon. A part of Catelyn wanted to simply walk out the door, a very large part, but another reminded herself that this was her nephew and he deserved more than she had given him in the past. So Catelyn smoothed out the blankets he was under, giving herself more of them to better tuck him in, which she did as swiftly as she should. She looked upon Jon in that moment and saw the small boy who had the pox, and once again she felt guilty for being unable to feel as an aunt to an orphan child should, and so she left the room soon after to banish such troubling thoughts from her mind. As Catelyn walked back to her chambers, she passed her eldest's room, the door to which had been carelessly left open, a crack probably because her son rarely bothered to actually make sure his doors were shut. It was because of this Catelyn heard Bran speaking to Robb, unlike she'd ever heard him speak. "Trust him not, Robb. He'll stab you in the back." Robb somehow sounded much younger than Bran when he said, "Theon hasn't done anything yet. Mayhaps things might turn out differently this time. Yet, give him but the opportunity," added Arya, whom Catelyn didn't find herself surprised at hearing her present. "Maybe he could change." "Do you want to say father or not?" charged Bran. Was Ned in trouble? Was Theon plotting to kill him? "Of course!" replied Robb. Catelyn couldn't bear it anymore, and she burst into her eldest's room to the surprise of all 3 of its occupants. After escaping what clearly felt like a remedial lesson in being able to detect and align the grain in a piece of fabric appropriately when cutting material to make clothing, Sansa immediately hurried away to the library tower to ensconce herself for the remainder of the afternoon. She had never felt the need to visit the lonely tower at the center of the southern courtyard, which had no other entrance save the winding steps that encircled the outside of the building. From its windows, Sansa had a view of the entire courtyard and practice yard, as the library tower stood closest to the heart of the castle. This afternoon, she had decided that she would help Bran in his quest. She wasn't sure about his report about the others returning, but if he'd been attacked by whites, mayhaps it might be that the whites and others were separate creatures that had been misappropriately linked through the millennia. To discover this, she had to see if reports of whites had ever come without there being any others, which meant sifting through the upper shelves of the tall bookcases, on the edge of her toes on the top step of the ladder. Most of the oldest books, if they could be called that, were loose collections of paper between what looked suspiciously like animal hides bound with twine, with titles written in what almost looked like some kind of red amber. Sansa pulled one down, titled Creatures of the Wides, which looked promising. Sansa found that it was hardly as promising as it seemed. As she flipped through the pages, there were a lot of antiquated spellings, and some pages the red amber ink was cracking and threatened to fall off unless she delicately turned the pages. This made her consider that someone should soon copy down these ancient texts before they were lost to time. There were many creatures, both familiar and fantastic, that she saw and skimmed over as she looked through the book. Sometimes she paused to admire the detailed artistry of a particular drawing. What made her pause, though, was when she came to an intricate drawing of a pack of dire wolves, obviously hunting with a man. At first, when she looked at the man drawn, she thought he shared some look of father's, except he was of a stockier build, and perhaps shorter, judging by the size of the dire wolves surrounding him. But beyond that, the man had the traditional stark features of a long face, gray eyes, and dark hair. The text next to the picture described the scene, King John and Hate pack of dire wolves. Sansa then looked to the next page to read the text dedicated to the dire wolves, which read as such. The dire wolf is a fearsome creature native only to Westeros. Bunches found suggest they prowl as fair sooth of the Blackwater rush when men cam boat today error found primarily in the north. For as a time it was sooth fairs, the thought they had been hunted to death across Westeros. For as there pelta by the men before thee came to honor the gods here, and that of the Green West. According to legend, a small pack west discovered in the wolves' waters of the north just before the longe night from which all their wolves which in the north. Or that their wolves in the north, Arya from the that are considered an honor able and daughter of loyal animal, living primarily in Paxley, like their smaller cousins. This year's smaller cousin, there was a few lonely dire wolves have been known to be found from time to time. That are commonly believed to be more intelligent than their smaller cousins. Some conform special bonds with men descended from Islaman, which is known in the Greenway Asiv Wardrienzi. It is known that too, on the 1,000 men descended from a single Isleman is it born. A warg, it has been proposed in the case of some descendant of Islaman, who intermarry that to moderate Ferris Wardrians it likely to appear. To develop this ability, it is said that to a man and dire wolf must awaken within themselves a trust from which a pack bond. If a pack bond is interrupted or cut short before it has fully matured, this can negative affect both man and dire wolves, possible leading to madness, troubles, warging, loss of empathy, and dire's blonde wolf behavior prods. Sansa immediately felt that the gods old and new had led her to this information. After seeing it, she knew it was vitally important, and so she had to find a scroll of some sort and some ink and copy it down. After having done so, she carefully closed the book and returned it to its spot and hurried out the library tower to try and find Bran, completely forgetting why she had come to the library tower in the first place. However, as she came close to the foot of the stairs, she heard her father call to her. He met her at the last step of the stairwell. "Father, have you seen Bran?" asked Sansa. "Last I saw him, he was in the practice yard." "Sansa, I have a question that I might ask of you." "Do you know when Lysae will... Well, you understand." After retreating to the older part of the courtyard near the entrance to the crypt so that they might speak alone, Eddard found his daughter was quite clear of what she knew. Sansa could tell him people, actions, and reasons, but not the timing. After he had thoroughly questioned her on the subject, he was then questioned by Sansa herself. Sansa looked up at him and asked hesitatingly, "Do you believe us then, father?" Eddard did not answer at first. He wanted to believe her, but if he accepted the idea, how could he explain it? No, that wasn't the important thing. What mattered was that Jon Arryn, the man who'd raised him to be a man, would be safe. It had taken him a dream to realize just what Sansa had threatened to use as proof for him. In the dream, his family, both Stark and Tullys, had sat at a banquet table with the Arryns and watched as Lysa Arryn poured poison in the golden chalices that Jon himself, Catelyn, Robb, his nephew, and even Robert, her own sickly child, drank from. And despite seeing her pour the poison, they had all drank the wine in his dream, toasting to the health of Lysa, who then transformed into a bird and took flight, only to be struck down by an arrow. The dream had troubled him and made him truly consider what Sansa had said in his solar. Was his second father truly worth the price of having such proof of her story? Could he even chance that? Why hadn't he thought of this before? The answer came as quickly as the question had. His mind had been too concerned with escaping the room and his worries about Catelyn to think straight. In fact, he still couldn't abide staying cooped up for long in a room. He needed to be outside, and he found walking the courtyard to be relaxing. But today, even that proved slightly irritating due to the walls that seemed taller and more imposing than they had yesterday. Eddard banished such thoughts from his head. He had to focus for Jon's sake, if not his own. There were other ways to get proof, he now realized, and so he began by asking, "Tell me, Sansa, how did you come to know your aunt?" Sansa seemed to lose herself in her thoughts as much as he had before answering. "I lived with her for a time in the Eyrie after Lord Baelish married her." That was it. If she had truly been to the Eyrie, she could describe it. He hardly spoke of his time in the Eyrie to his children, for though it had been a happy time of his life, there had been little need to speak of it, as, he figured, most parents found their childhoods. "Tell me about the Eyrie. If you've truly been there, I will know. And since I know you've never visited there in your life up until now, if you can tell me of the Eyrie now, I shall have no reason not to believe you." "Ah, but I could have read about it in a book," chimed Sansa with a slight scoff in response, as if foreseeing his doubts. "There are some things about castles that one can't read in books. Speak to me of the Eyrie, and I will know. Is all you want to hear is of how utterly lonely a place it is, of how the wind whistles its way around its beautiful 7 tall white towers, creating a moaning sound that is heard day and night throughout its halls and rattling the moon door, so that it sounds as though all the dead who have been pushed through threaten to rise once more and seek vengeance. It is as empty as tomb. There is no comfort there. The gods are silent, both old and new, and they answer no prayers. How can they, when there's a sept, but no septon, and a godswood but no heart tree?" Eddard knew at once. As he breathed slightly deeper, he used the technique to try and hold back his first memories of that castle he had had before. Truly befriending Robert, there was no way she could not have been there and known its atmosphere with such clarity. "I'm sorry for doubting you." It was after that Eddard returned to his solar to write 2 messages. The first one was addressed to Robert, asking him to make Jon Snow his legitimate son and entitled to the Stark name, with the condition he inherit anything after all his children's unlikely demise. He would require at some point for Eddard to visit King's Landing to explain the matter further. Likely, but at least for now, the matter was open for discussion. The second message Eddard wrote was addressed to Jon Arryn. In it, he expressed a great desire to have their families together, should the king permit it, and if Jon himself could not come, he made reference of the fact that his son's cousins expressed a fervent desire to meet him, and he expressed how Catelyn missed her sister greatly, which she did. Eddard knew. He also offered that, should Winterfell prove to be amenable to the boy, that he would be honored to foster the boy as Jon had done for himself in the Eyrie, hoping to perhaps begin a tradition between their 2 houses to last long into the future. Lastly, his letter to Jon turned to an oblique warning about some recent news he'd heard about the recent decline in the quality of wine imported through Gulltown by Lord Baelish, suggesting a taste tester with a good palate to determine its quality. The warning was coded, but Eddard knew Jon would immediately see to its true meaning, and to anyone else who might get their hands on the letter, it would seem a meaningless little passage in an otherwise familial letter. Eddard hoped that by removing Jon's murderer, he could avoid giving her the opportunity. He just hoped he was sending it in time. After the evening meal, Eddard returned to Jon's room to see if he had yet awakened, but he hadn't. Arya had walked with him to the room. "I told the Scepter that you were excused today from your lessons, but I did not mention anything about tomorrow." "I must be here when he wakes," insisted Arya, without looking up. "Do you have something important to tell him, then?" "Perhaps," she said, shifting her shoulders so that his hand slipped off. And knowing that he'd hardly get anything else out of her without prompting an argument, Eddard left it at that. It felt too warm in Jon's room, and he felt the need to walk out in the cool evening air. As he walked in the moonlight, he found his way once again, leading him to the kennels where he came upon the penned-up direwolf mother, looking despondent within her pen. She tried to rise when he approached, but her leg was still too weak to support her, and so she fell and returned to her moping. When their mother burst into Robb's room, Bran, Arya, and even Robb were all taken aback by her demanding question. "What is Theon planning to do to your father?" The three of them each shared a look before even attempting to speak on the subject. Robb started to say something, but Arya was the one who gained their mother's attention, and that of Bran and Robb's, by saying, "He's plotting to kill father." "Arya, do you know what you're saying?" asked their mother with a distressed look. Arya was definitive in her response. "I do, and it's the truth." At this, Bran could see their mother was hardly convinced by Arya's simple proclamation, and so decided to embellish his sister's story a bit. "I'm the one who found out about it." Pausing for dramatic effect, Bran then sighed and said, "He's been secretly writing his father for a few months. I found one of his letters. That's how I found out about it. His father's disowned him in favor of his sister, which Theon takes as an insult. His father says if he wants what is his, he needs to make the Starks pay the iron price for killing his brothers and take Winterfell." Their mother appeared to be in utter shock at this revelation. Robb, having finished staring in shock at Arya, now looked at Bran as if he didn't know him, and Bran mentally agreed. Robb didn't know him at all. Theon was a danger to the family, if left to his own devices. He'll attack Winterfell given the chance. All of this was true as it had already happened, and was likely to happen again. Theon deserved whatever he got. Their mother raised her eyebrow in suspicion. "How do you know he's agreed to this? Thus far, all plotting is Balin's. Have you forgotten? He almost killed Rickon. If Bran hadn't been in that dire wolf, he might have shot him." Their mother seemed greatly affected by this reminder, which was only confirmed when she asked, "If what you say is true, then why haven't you spoken about this with your father?" "He won't listen. He still thinks of Theon as though he were my age," explained Arya. Bran then added for good measure, "And besides, we want to catch him in the act. Then there's no denying he's a turncloak." "You could help us take care of him," suggested Arya. "You two are just children. It isn't your place to catch anyone in any act," scolded their mother. She then signed and said, "I'm going to take care of this," and then she left the room. Once their mother had left and the door was shut, Robb stared at them both with a look that a few years ago might have shamed Bran into a submissive guilt, but now only served to expose how ridiculous Robb looked making the face. "That was not honorable, either of you. Honor is a luxury of a summer's peace. What use is it when you have no idea where you'll get your next meal? And what becomes of the last honorable man? He dies." Having said her say, Arya then left the room, presumably to return to Jon's room. "You believe not that rubbish, do you?" asked Robb. Branson only said, "Robb, we're not the Bran and Arya you once knew. They're long gone." Bran didn't say anything else. He could hardly believe that Robb, his older brother, could sound so naive. And so he too left his supposedly older sibling, and he returned to Jon's room to seek out Arya. He found Arya had done as he'd suspected, only now she was laying down next to Jon, as though she were trying to nestle herself by his side. As he entered, Arya's head shot up almost immediately, and her eyes met his, relaxing upon seeing him. Bran could see she'd been crying, but had recently wiped her tear-stained cheeks to rid her of any lasting evidence. Bran said nothing, instead choosing to sit down on the other side of Jon across from his sister. And then tentatively he reached over the thin mounds that were Jon's legs, and he hugged his sister, allowing them both to cry. Neither said a word, instead simply choosing to let the other have someone to hold on to and cry. After they had cried themselves out, Bran found himself too tired to return to his own room. So he emulated his elder sister by falling asleep at Jon's other side, curling up as much as she could into his brother's side. That night, Bran had a dream. In it, an old man of the Night's Watch, without any ears, knelt before a block at the foot of Winterfell's heart tree, before half the castle. As he spoke, his breath formed into small icemen, who grew tall and intimidating and began to kill indiscriminately. Some part of Bran knew these strangely beautiful but deadly monsters. Were these the others? Suddenly, his father swung his sword and blood gushed from the wound, to the foot of the heart tree, and the strangest thing of all occurred. It began to grow. Robb needed Jon to wake up now. He shouted as much to his little brother's still sleeping body, when he had luckily found Arya absent the following day from the room. And soon Robb found himself talking to Jon as if he were awake, finding it oddly comforting to do so. "You were always better with them than I was. I've always counted that just being the eldest would be enough for me. Mother didn't believe me when I tried to tell her this morning that it was all a lie." Before I could even finish explaining, she scrunched up her face and said, "Brain would never lie." Of course, her precious brain never would. And yet he did. right to her face. And as far as I can tell, he doesn't regret it one bit. Father didn't even want to speak to me this morning. As soon as he broke his fast, he was out of the great hall and into the courtyard. And when I tried to track him down, I heard he and Jory had taken their horses and went out for a ride in the Wolfswood. Mother doesn't believe me, Father doesn't seem to care about any of it, and our little brothers and sisters try every way they can to get rid of Theon. If they're not careful, they're going to actually turn Theon into the very thing they say he is. I know he's capable of turning his cloak, I guess I have to freely admit that, but there's a difference between might and half. Most of all, though, I simply can't believe they lied like that. I think you would not believe it either if you were awake. At least I hope you would. Either way, you'd at least know what to say. Robb left his last words hang in the air, hoping they might somehow tempt Jon out of his long slumber to answer him. But they did not. Not too long after that, the door to the room opened and Robb turned his head to find his sister Sansa standing in the doorway. As she entered, she asked, "Any change?" "No," was Robb's only response. Sansa then crossed the room and sat on Jon's bed, brushing his dark hair from his face. "He looks so much younger when he's asleep. I believe it is due to him not having to hold such serious a countenance." He loses at least 3 years, Robb conceded. Sansa then abruptly stood, sighing, as she said, "But when he wakes, they all come flooding back, no matter how he may appear otherwise." Robb got the impression that they weren't just talking about Jon now. "I know it's hard to understand, Robb, that we still look the same, but aren't. It's just something you're going to have to make your peace with." "I'm not Rickon, so speak not to me that way," growled Robb, indignant at her condescension. "I know not about that. Ofttimes you resemble him even better than he does himself. At least he'd hear me through to the end." And as Sansa was about to cross the threshold, she stopped, turned, and said, "Oh, one other thing, Mother's locked Theon in his rooms. I thought you should know. There was something about the forest that was thrilling." Eddard didn't know what it was about it, but he attributed it to being something he'd never considered before. He could gallop his horse for miles without having to stop. There was something to the rush of the chase that riled his blood. He had meant to come alone. There was just something about that which attracted him to the experience. But Jory had insisted on accompanying him, citing that there must be other dire wolves. How else did the bitch get with pups, after all? Some less friendly, as well as the potential for wildlings. Eddard endured the younger man's company, but secretly wished that he and his mount didn't have to wait for him to constantly catch up. When they had reached a tiny creek, Eddard let his horse rest and drink while he jumped off and simply took in the forest. Its sights, smells, and sounds all somehow delighting him like they ne'er had before. Jory soon caught up and allowed his old nag to follow the example of his hunter. It was here that Jory mentioned the need to return to Winterfell, so as to not miss the midday meal. This jarred Eddard out of his reverie. Had they truly been out riding all morning? He'd only meant to have a short ride and to return to hear petitions as warden with utmost haste. They returned to Winterfell through the Hunter's Gate. As he entered the gate, a stable hand was there to greet him and take his and Jory's mount back to the stables. As he dismounted, he spoke with the man. "What news?" asked Eddard. "'Tis not much, my lord. Greyjoy has taken ill, and Lady Stark has confined you in his room, but beyond that, we have passed a quiet morning." This was news to Eddard. "Ill? How did he become ill so quickly?" "All I know, my lord, is he woke up late this morning and was retching out his window. Damn near hit me too." "Thank you, Darren." It was then that Eddard felt small arms wrap around his left leg. He looked down to see Rickon there, and he smiled slightly at the sight. "Papa, I was worried that you had left." Ned replied with a bit of good humor. "Have I worried you thus? My apologies, Pop." Ned, however, found that Rickon was reluctant at best to leave his side as he continued on into the Great Keep. When he came to Tien's room, he found Maester Luwin, leaving it. The bald older man looked greatly troubled, which Eddard didn't take too well. "What do you believe is wrong with Theon?" asked Eddard. As he spoke, Luwin tugged at his tight choker of a chain unconsciously. "I would say that he ate something which has upset his humors and his body is trying to correct it as best it can. He's purged his excess bile, but now he has a quick pulse and a slight fever. I'm going to have to bleed him." Eddard bit his lip before he asked, "What do you think he could have eaten?" Master Luwin smiled ruefully and gave half an attempt to laugh, but it died and turned into a sigh before he said, "That's the thing that worries me. When I looked through his bile, there wasn't anything in it that hasn't been eaten by anyone else. Truth is, we might all be sick, and Theon is simply the first to show the symptoms." Eddard felt sick already at hearing the man's suspicions. "I'll speak with the cook later." Perhaps this is simply due to some moldy meat. One last question. If we're all potentially sick, then Naina's Catelyn can find Theon. I haven't told her of my suspicions yet. I had wanted to wait until you had returned before doing so. You may mention it to her if you wish. She's in there at the moment with Robb. If you wish to speak with her. Eddard nodded. He then asked Luwin if Jon had awakened yet, and that he shook his head, mumbling that Jon may have had an unforeseen reaction to the dream wine and milk of the poppy taken Tager. It wasn't completely rare, but it wasn't a typical reaction either, and Eddard accepted the man's explanation. He then allowed Maester Luwin to continue on his way. Before entering Theon's room, Eddard told Rickon that he should go outside, but the boy refused to leave him, and Eddard, thinking his pup likely sick already, dropped the matter before it provoked him. He told Rickon that while he was in the room with Theon, he was to behave himself, and made him swear it on his honor as a Stark witch. The toddler very seriously agreed to, after some reluctance. When Eddard entered Theon's room, he found Catelyn suspiciously rifling through some pieces of parchment on the boy's desk. Theon was in his bed, as flushed as Luwin had described him, and apparently was out cold, judging by Catelyn's behavior. Does Theon have to wake up and tell you himself for you to believe it? Did Bran and Arya were lying to you, insisted Robb as Eddard entered the room. Ned, exclaimed Catelyn, freezing as though caught in the act. What are you doing, Cat? As Luwin returned from the Maester's turret with his bloodletting bag, he pondered the past few eventful days. He'd been called upon more times in these past few days in his role as physician than he cared to keep record of. It all marked him as a rather strange series of incidents. Seeming to build on top of one another, he hoped that this sickness that had befallen Theon would be the end of it, but for all he knew, it could yet grow worse. He did not suspect the boy had been poisoned. He had none of the common symptoms, but a nagging feeling told him that the continued lack of any other person having gotten ill bespoke of nothing else. Mayhaps he had drank something, but as far as he knew, they all shared the same water and ale, and from what he had seen, the boy had no private reserves in his own room. It was also very strange to suddenly become ill like this never bode well. So lost in thought was Luwin that he failed to notice the young Arya bump into him at the entrance to the Great Keep, knocking the case open and all of the materials to fall out, which included his knife, a jar of leeches, a clean roll of cloth, and a shaving basin. She didn't apologize for the action, but instead offered without prompting to help him recover and gather the strewn about objects. Luwin found the delay a bit of a nuisance, but after appropriately reminding the girl to watch where she was going, he entered the Great Keep, and as he took to the steps, he heard the last of Lady and Lord Stark's conversation, who had apparently stepped outside of the room to speak. "And why do you only tell me this now?" demanded Lady Stark. "So that you may try to understand why our children might be inclined to lie where Theon is concerned. I know it's a tremendous lot to accept, but..." And it was there that Luwin's presence was acknowledged with silence. It was after the evening meal when once again he had his children in his solar. This time Catelyn joining the proceeding. She had been loath to accept the truth from him, but she'd entertained the idea until further proof could be obtained, and the only way to do that was to get the four youngest to speak. She held Rickon in her arms from the chair she'd chosen for herself, trying to calm the fussy toddler, whose worry for Ned had long since passed, and his desire to be near the wolf having returned. The only difference from the earlier scene mirrors reflected candlelight now, though as the sun was setting, he would have it all out with them all present, excepting Jon, unfortunately. Robb skulked in a corner near a window, while his middle three stood before himself and Catelyn. He got right to the point once they'd all assembled from the quiet evening meal.
"Bran, Arya,
Why did you lie to your mother?" Bran, for his credit, didn't meet either himself or Cat in the eye, and chose instead the rod of silence. Of Arya, the same could not be said. "Does it truly matter now?" asked Arya. Ned growled, "You are a Stark. Of course it matters. It is wrong, and you both shall apologize to your mother." Neither said anything, which shocked Ned. They truly believed they were in the right, and to this effect, Bran finally quietly added, "The only lie was about the letter, the rest is based in truth." "From this future you believe you're from?" asked Catelyn pointedly. "Aye, it is," answered Bran honestly. Ned held back his anger and countered, "And yet you did not think to come to us about this." "You didn't believe us before," was Bran's simple answer. Ned heard Cat breathe deeply at the mention of this. She did not blame him for not telling her something he truly hadn't believed himself at first, but she still seemed troubled by the issue nonetheless. He couldn't begrudge her little faults. Gods knew he had them. There was the rub of it, though. They acted upon their knowledge, because he had doubted. They nearly had succeeded in killing Theon, thank the gods that Maester Luwin was at his work. If the boy died now, there would be a second Greyjoy rebellion. Of that, he had no doubt. Reports that the Iron Fleet had nearly been rebuilt had been whispered about from the Mormont spies upon the Iron Isles and reached his ears. Theon needed to live. There was no way at it. There would be no hope of Lysa setting foot in the north if it were at war, and then Jon would. And that's when Ned realized that he too was acting upon knowledge and was manipulating events. But he was doing it to save lives, not take them. And he must continue to do so. Sansa convinced me of the truth later, explained Ned. He then turned to his eldest daughter and asked, "Did not you tell them?" Sansa replied, "To speak plainly, I," and she paused to fleetingly catch Aenray's eye. Ned noticed before finishing with forgot. He knew what that look meant. Forgot or were busy with something else, asked Ned. She looked at him and plainly told him, "I know not what you mean, father." How did the Theon fall ill so suddenly? Master Luwin suspects it was something that he ate, but the cook assured me he's eaten nothing that we have not eaten ourselves. And yet we aren't sick, and if it had been the water or the ale, again we would be ill too, and yet we are not. I know from your mother and Robb that you three have taken issue with Theon, for reasons which I grant may seem justified to you. And so the answer is simple. He'll be dead soon. What does it matter? Asked Arya. And what gave you that right to decide what the gods alone decide? Have you stopped to consider what will happen if Theon dies? As much as he is my ward, he is also Robert's hostage to keep Balon in check. If Theon dies on my watch, what's to stop his father from taking out his grief upon our western shores? It would be war, said Ned, hoping they weren't completely beyond reason. His three youngest were silent, but it was Bran was the one to speak next, and he seemed to speak with a solemnity that not even Jon could match. Ward would come anyway, and death is a mercy compared to the future that awaits him. Ned felt a chill run down his spine at his son's words. Just what things had his children seen and endured. Catelyn, however, who replied, "The future, you hide behind it as your shield, and yet never speak of it. That ends now." "Cat," began Ned, hoping to curb her building rage. "No, you might be frightened into belief on their dark words, but they haven't convinced me of anything. If they're going to act out based upon what knowledge they know, then we should all know." But before any of his children could respond, Ned felt a terrible pain sweep through his body, and he heard the wolf howl. He stood in Winterfell alone. All around him in the courtyard, snow hung about the ruined castle, now a shell of what it had once been. Everything was deathly silent, so that he only heard himself breathe, and the snow fall. Unable to believe what he saw, began to explore what was left of the castle. The only thing that remained unchanged, oddly enough, was the broken tower. The roof to the great hall had caved in. The great keep had been reduced to rubble, and the throne of winter was covered in snow. But the broken tower remained as he remembered it. Just then he heard the cawing of a crow, and looked up to see a sight he never expected to see staring back at him. A three-eyed crow. The bird stared at him for a moment, before taking flight, soaring about the courtyard before landing at the destroyed rubble that had been the entrance to the crypts. It cawed once more and then flew down into the crypt. Jon felt compelled to follow, and so he stumbled down the snow-covered stairs into the crypts. Once inside, he oddly felt warm, and he turned around to see that the snow-covered steps had disappeared. He turned around again and jumped in surprise to see the three-eyed crow staring at him directly in his face from the perch of a statue. Jon now stood in front of. He recognized the statue. It was that of his Aunt Lyanna. But unlike the statue he remembered, this had become painted so that it almost looked alive, and a wreath of winter roses now sat atop it. Just then the statue grabbed his shoulders tightly, the cold painted stone chilling him to the bone, and suddenly Jon heard the statue speak, its mouth cracking open with a horrible sound of splitting stone. And through it all he heard it say in a woman's voice, "Promise me, Ned." And that was when Jon awoke. When Jon awoke, he was alone. But then most of his life, he'd been alone in his room, so this wasn't so necessarily unexpected. It still would have been nice to have woken up and had someone in the room with him. But that might have been expecting too much. His head ached like none other, and he felt sore and bruised all over. But beyond this, he felt rather fine, for having been thrown from a horse. He was starved. That was one thing he was sure of. With some trouble, he dressed himself and left his room. As he walked across the dusk-lit courtyard to the kitchens, Jon recalled why he and Robb had gone into the Wolfswood in the first place, and he ruefully thought Eon was probably already halfway to Pike by this point. There'd be no catching him now. He'd failed Bran and Rickon, and that is why he was forgotten and alone, because of his failures. When he came into the kitchen, he found it busy with activity of cleaning up after the evening meal. No one took notice of his entrance immediately, and he did his best to fade into the background as he slipped into the pantry. Once inside, he found a bushel of apples, one of which he picked up and shone before taking a bite. It wasn't much, but while he felt like eating, everything else seemed to turn his stomach to look at it. So the apple satiated his hunger for now. Jon slipped out of the pantry as easily as he had slid in. He finished the apple and tossed the core as high as he could over the inner wall. He heard it splash as it landed in the moat. Where was everyone? He had yet to see any of his siblings or his father for that matter, and that worried him. Had something happened to them while he had slept? Had they abandoned the castle because of Theon's escape? It was then he heard an odd noise come from the kennel, the sound of a wolf. What was a wolf doing in Winterfell? He hazily recalled being attacked by such a beast in the forest. Had it made its way into the castle? Jon immediately went to the kennels to discover the truth. As he came near, he heard the wolf howl again, its lonely cry ringing out over the night. After entering the kennel door, he passed rows of pens with many whimpering dogs, some barking at his approach or in response to the wolf's cry. The wolf's howl came from a pen at the end of the kennel, in the far corner from its entrance, and there he found squatting and panting was the wolf. Jon was taken aback by its size and believed it upon sight to be the beast that had attacked him. But what was it doing here? It howled for a third time, and Jon watched as a small thin sack-covered object dropped from the wolf and to the floor, where immediately the wolf took to licking and nipping at until the sack itself was eaten by the mother, leaving behind a small blind white creature which whimpered and moved its tiny arms and legs without purpose. The wolf was whelping a litter. The wolf then collapsed to its side, still continuing to pant, and nuzzled the newborn pup to its side, where it searched for a teat and found one to suckle. This process repeated a second time, this time producing a gray pup, before someone else came to see the cause of the commotion. It was then that Jon saw his father enter the kennel, looking haggard and weary. His froze when he saw Jon, and then a relieved smile crept upon his face. Jon was scooped up into what was possibly the warmest embrace of his life from his father, followed soon after by his siblings. And even if it was just for a moment, Jon did not feel as alone.
Thank you for listening to the story. If you enjoyed this reimagined story and audiobook style presentation, feel free to like and subscribe for more content like this. New stories and alternate scenarios are updated regularly. Now see you in the next video.